Love changes quietly, almost imperceptibly, the moment you stop waiting for it to happen inside you. Not when someone arrives, not when a message appears, but when the inner tension finally loosens, the tension of hoping, anticipating, bracing yourself for disappointment. This is the moment when love shifts from longing into choice. For a long time, you lived with an invisible posture, leaning forward emotionally, waiting internally, waiting for him to decide, to mature, to notice, to choose you more fully. And even when you told yourself you were calm, something inside remained alert, slightly anxious, always prepared to adapt. That inner waiting shaped everything: your tone, your patience, your tolerance. It shaped how much you gave before being asked, and how long you stayed when something felt unfinished. As Carl Jung said, what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. Inner waiting is one of those unconscious patterns. It feels like love, but it is actually a subtle dependence on an outcome. You are not waiting for a person, you are waiting for relief. Relief from uncertainty, relief from not knowing where you stand. And the body remembers this. The body tightens, the breath shortens, the heart stays open but unprotected. You tell yourself you are hopeful, but hope mixed with anxiety becomes a quiet exhaustion. You begin to negotiate with silence. You read meanings into pauses. You delay your own clarity because part of you believes that patience will be rewarded. But something profound happens when you stop waiting internally. The nervous system settles. The mind stops rehearsing futures. The heart stops bargaining. You no longer lean toward love, you stand inside yourself. Jung would call this the beginning of individuation. The moment a woman stops orienting her inner world around another person and reclaims it as her own center. This is not indifference. It is grounded presence. When inner waiting dissolves, you stop needing love to confirm your worth. You stop scanning for signs. You stop preparing explanations. And suddenly, love is no longer something you are hoping will choose you. It becomes something you choose. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because a woman who is no longer waiting internally is no longer available for uncertainty disguised as potential. She is no longer suspended between desire and fear. She is here, rooted, awake. And this is where love truly begins. Not in hope, not in anxiety, but in conscious choice. When you stop waiting internally, the world does not collapse, it reorganizes. At first, this can feel unsettling because you are no longer fueled by anticipation. The familiar emotional tension that once kept you alert begins to fade, and with it goes a certain illusion, the belief that love requires endurance. You start to notice how much of your energy was spent holding space for something that had not yet arrived. Inner waiting often disguises itself as loyalty, as patience, as emotional depth. But in truth, it is a postponement of self-authority. You delayed your own decisions because you were still emotionally positioned in almost chosen, almost secure, almost understood. And almost is a very comfortable place for uncertainty to live. In Jung's view, anxiety appears when the psyche senses that we are betraying our own center. And this is exactly what inner waiting does. It pulls you away from yourself and anchors your emotional stability to another person's readiness. You begin to feel restless without knowing why. You become overly reflective, overly forgiving, overly flexible. Not because you lack strength, but because your strength is being redirected outward. But the moment you release this internal posture of waiting, something recalibrates. You no longer wake up emotionally braced. You no longer measure your mood by someone else's consistency. Your nervous system begins to understand that safety does not come from reassurance. It comes from self-alignment. This is where choice enters, not as a dramatic declaration, but as a quiet inner certainty. You stop asking, will this turn into something? And start asking, does this feel aligned with who I am now? The difference is profound. One question is rooted in fear of loss. The other is rooted in self-respect. And men feel this shift immediately, even if they cannot name it. Your energy changes. You are no longer leaning toward them emotionally. You are no longer subtly available for ambiguity. There is less explaining, less emotional maintenance, less inner justification. You are present, but not waiting. Jung said that when a person withdraws projections, reality becomes clearer. When you stop projecting hope onto potential, you finally see what is, not what could be. And this clarity is not cruel, it is liberating. Because now, love is no longer something you are trying to secure. It is something you are evaluating. This is the moment when love stops being an emotional gamble and becomes a conscious decision. And once you arrive here, you realize something quietly powerful. You were never meant to wait for love. You were meant to meet it from a place of inner solidity. As you settle into this new inner position, you may notice something unexpected. The silence feels different. It is no longer heavy with expectation. It is no longer filled with imagined conversations or rehearsed futures. The silence becomes spacious, neutral, honest. And within that honesty, you begin to hear yourself more clearly than ever before. This is where many women feel a strange mixture of calm and grief. Calm, because the inner tension is gone. Grief, because you finally see how long you lived in emotional anticipation. You were not waiting for love to arrive. You were waiting for permission to relax. And realizing this can feel like waking up from a beautiful but exhausting dream. Jung believed that growth often begins with disillusionment. Not the kind that hardens you, but the kind that clears your vision. When inner hope was mixed with anxiety, it kept you emotionally invested in possibility rather than reality. You stayed engaged not with what was happening, but with what might happen if you waited just a little longer. Now, without that internal waiting, reality becomes sharper and strangely kinder. You stop filling gaps with fantasy. You stop explaining inconsistency as complexity. You stop mistaking emotional intensity for depth. What remains is simple: presence or absence, effort or avoidance, alignment or resistance. And here is the most important shift. You no longer feel responsible for keeping the emotional connection alive on your own. You no longer monitor the rhythm, the pace, the temperature of the bond. You allow it to reveal itself. This is not withdrawal. It is trust in your own perception. When a woman releases inner hope that is rooted in anxiety, she does not become colder. She becomes clearer. Her heart is still open, but it is no longer leaning forward. She meets instead of waits. She observes instead of anticipates. She responds instead of overgiving. Jung said that maturity means accepting the tension of opposites without rushing to resolve it. And this is exactly what you are learning now. You allow uncertainty to exist without trying to soothe it. You allow another person to show who they are without trying to guide the outcome. And something remarkable happens in this space. Love, when it is real, steps forward. It does not need to be pulled. It does not need to be imagined. It reveals itself through consistency, through presence, through choice. And if it does not, you no longer collapse inward. You do not feel abandoned. You feel informed. Because when you stop waiting internally, you stop confusing hope with connection. You stand inside your own life. And from there, love either meets you or makes room for something truer to arrive. With this inner shift, something deeply unfamiliar begins to feel natural. You stop chasing emotional certainty. Not because you no longer care, but because you no longer abandon yourself to feel secure. The urgency fades. The inner clock that once measured time by messages, gestures, and pauses simply stops ticking. This is where many women misunderstand themselves at first. They think they have become detached. But what has actually happened is integration. Jung described this as the psyche returning to its center after years of projection. You are no longer placing your emotional future into someone else's hands. You are holding it yourself. And when you do this, your standards quietly rise, not from pride, but from alignment. You begin to feel when something is off without trying to fix it. You notice when interest is inconsistent without interpreting it as mystery. You sense when effort is uneven without blaming yourself for expecting more. The most profound change is internal. You stop negotiating with discomfort. Before, discomfort was something to overcome by being more patient, more understanding, more flexible. Now, discomfort becomes information, a signal, a message from your deeper self saying, "This does not match who you are anymore." Jung believed that intuition is the voice of the unconscious guiding us toward wholeness. And intuition grows louder when anxiety quiets down. When you are no longer waiting internally, your intuition is no longer drowned out by hope. You hear it clearly, calmly, without drama. This is also where choice becomes embodied, not intellectual. You don't make long lists of pros and cons. You don't argue yourself into staying. You simply feel whether something expands you or contracts you, whether it adds to your life or drains from it. And here is the paradox. When you stop waiting internally, you become more present than ever. You listen more attentively. You speak more honestly. You laugh without calculation. You enjoy without attachment. Because you are no longer trying to secure an outcome. You are experiencing what is real. Men feel this as a shift in gravity. You are no longer emotionally hovering. You are grounded. And grounding changes dynamics effortlessly. It removes pressure, illusion, and emotional bargaining. What remains is truth. And in truth, love cannot hide. It either shows up, or it quietly steps aside. And for the first time, either outcome leaves you intact. As this new inner stability settles in, you begin to recognize how deeply waiting shaped your identity in love. You were not just waiting for someone. You were waiting as someone. Someone accommodating. Someone patient. Someone who left the door slightly open, just in case. And releasing that posture feels like stepping out of a role you never consciously chose. There is a quiet dignity that emerges here. You stop adjusting your emotional temperature to match another person's inconsistency. You no longer warm what is cold or soften what resists. You allow people to meet you where they are, without translating, smoothing, or rescuing the connection. Jung spoke of the shadow as the part of us that adapts too much in order to belong. And when inner waiting dissolves, that shadow loses its grip. You no longer need to earn closeness by endurance. You no longer prove your worth through tolerance. You simply exist, and existence becomes enough. This is where love stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like resonance. Conversations flow or they don't. Presence is offered or it isn't. And you do not personalize the difference. You understand that compatibility is not created by patience alone. It is revealed by mutual readiness. You may notice that you become slower to attach, but quicker to perceive. Slower to hope, but faster to trust yourself. You no longer rush to emotionally invest before observing consistency. You allow time to do its quiet work, not as a test, but as a truth teller. And something almost paradoxical happens. By releasing inner hope rooted in anxiety, you do not become pessimistic. You become realistic, and realism brings peace. You stop romanticizing uncertainty. You stop seeing emotional confusion as depth. You stop confusing longing with connection. Jung would say that when projection ends, relationship begins. And this is exactly where you now stand. You meet people as they are, not as carriers of your unfulfilled hopes. You no longer ask love to save you from loneliness or doubt. You invite it to walk beside you, if it can. This is not the end of tenderness. It is the beginning of sovereignty. A woman who no longer waits internally loves from fullness, not from lack. And from this place, love no longer feels fragile. It feels chosen. Now, something even deeper begins to unfold. When you stop waiting internally, you also stop fearing loss in the same way. Not because loss wouldn't hurt, but because it no longer threatens your sense of self. You are no longer built around an outcome. You are rooted in your own continuity. This is where many women feel a quiet strength they have never known before. You no longer cling to what feels uncertain just to avoid emptiness. Emptiness itself loses its menace. Jung wrote that the fear of emptiness is often the fear of meeting oneself. And now, you are no longer afraid of that meeting. You begin to notice how your emotional reactions soften, not because you suppress them, but because they are no longer amplified by expectation. Disappointment does not spiral. Silence does not destabilize you. Distance no longer triggers self-doubt. You feel what you feel, and then you return to yourself. This is emotional maturity in its truest form. You are no longer trying to control the direction of love. You are allowing it to show its direction. And this allows you to stay open without being exposed, engaged without being dependent. Choice becomes your natural state. You choose how close to stand. You choose how much to give. You choose whether something belongs in your life, without pressure, without fear, without bargaining. Love is no longer something you wait for to define you. It is something you invite to meet you at your level. Men experience this shift as a quiet challenge, not because you demand more, but because you require clarity. Ambiguity no longer finds comfort in your presence. Half steps feel visible. Inconsistency feels loud. And consistency, when it appears, feels unmistakable. Jung believed that clarity activates both attraction and fear. Those who are capable of meeting you step forward. Those who relied on your patience step back. And this sorting is not painful, it is precise. It saves you time, energy, and emotional dilution. You are no longer suspended in emotional waiting rooms. You are living, fully, calmly, with a heart that is open, but no longer leaning. And from this place, love no longer feels like a question mark. It feels like a choice you are finally free to make. At this stage, you begin to notice how deeply your perception of time has changed. Before, time felt heavy, stretched between messages, gestures, promises. You were always slightly ahead of the present moment, leaning toward what might happen next. Now, time feels neutral, spacious. You are no longer living toward love. You are living within your life. This is one of the most subtle yet powerful consequences of releasing inner waiting. You stop postponing your own fullness. You no longer think, once this is clear, I'll relax, or once he decides, I'll feel safe. Safety is no longer delayed. It is internal, immediate, available. Jung believed that psychological freedom begins when we stop tying our inner peace to external validation. And this is exactly what is happening now. You are no longer measuring your worth through attention or consistency. You are measuring alignment with yourself, your values, your emotional rhythm. This is where your presence changes quality. You are warmer, but not pliable. Open, but not porous. You enjoy connection without disappearing inside it. You allow desire without letting it override discernment. And this balance feels unfamiliar at first, because you were taught that love must cost you something. But love that costs your inner stability is not love. It is survival dressed as devotion. And now, survival is no longer your language. You are no longer emotionally alert, scanning for shifts, bracing for disappointment. You are at ease inside your own nervous system. Men respond differently to this ease. Some feel drawn to the calm clarity of it. Others feel exposed by it. Because a woman who is no longer waiting internally does not need to be convinced. She sees. She senses. She decides. Jung said that when a person becomes whole, they stop asking the world to complete them. And this wholeness is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply removes the need for chasing, proving, enduring. And in this space, love becomes honest. It meets you as it is, not as a promise, not as a possibility, but as a reality that either fits or does not. And you no longer fear either outcome, because your life is no longer on hold. You are here, present, chosen by yourself first. And from this place, any love that enters your life must arrive not to save you, but to walk with you. From this place of inner steadiness, you begin to see love not as a destination, but as a meeting point. Two lives already in motion. Two inner worlds already inhabited. There is no urgency to merge, no fear of missing out, no need to secure a future before the present has even spoken. This is where your emotional posture fully changes. You are no longer available for emotional suspense. You do not linger in situations that ask you to pause your life while someone figures out theirs. Waiting internally once trained you to tolerate delay. Choice now teaches you to honor timing, yours. Jung wrote that when a woman withdraws her psychic energy from fantasy, it returns to her as strength. And this strength is quiet. It shows up in how easily you let things unfold without interference. You no longer interrupt reality with hope. You no longer soften truth to preserve connection. You notice how clean your decisions become. There is less internal debate, less emotional noise. If something feels unclear for too long, you step back without drama. If something feels nourishing, you allow it without fear. You are not guarding your heart. You are respecting it. This is also where love, when it is healthy, feels surprisingly calm. Not dull, not empty, calm, because it is no longer fueled by anxiety. There is no emotional guessing game, no internal rehearsal of outcomes. Presence speaks for itself, and if love does not arrive, you do not feel incomplete. Your life continues to expand. You invest in your rhythms, your body, your inner world. You feel desire without desperation, longing without collapse, because you are no longer waiting for love to begin your life. Jung believed that the soul grows when it is no longer divided against itself. And this division, between hope and fear, longing and self-protection, has finally softened. You are no longer split. You are whole. From wholeness, love is no longer something you chase or prepare for. It is something that recognizes you or quietly passes by. And either way, you remain grounded in the deepest certainty of all. You are already home within yourself. At this point, love no longer feels like something you are approaching. It feels like something that must approach you, not from pride, not from control, but from coherence. Your inner world is no longer fragmented by hope on one side and anxiety on the other. It has gathered itself into a single, steady presence. You begin to understand that waiting internally was never about patience. It was about fear of choosing too soon, fear of closing a door, fear of standing alone in your truth. But now, standing alone no longer feels like isolation. It feels like integrity. Jung said that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to live without self-betrayal. And this is exactly what you are doing now. You are no longer betraying yourself by staying emotionally open to what cannot meet you. You are no longer softening your needs to avoid loss. You are no longer postponing your clarity. This is where your boundaries become effortless. You don't explain them. You don't defend them. You live them. Your energy answers before your words ever need to. And because of this, people either adjust naturally or drift away without conflict. Love, when it appears, meets a woman who is not starving for reassurance. It meets someone who is not trying to be chosen, but someone who knows how to choose. And this changes the entire emotional dynamic. Love is no longer dramatic. It is mutual. You begin to notice how little you tolerate emotional confusion now, not because you are rigid, but because your nervous system recognizes peace as its new baseline. Anything that disrupts that peace must offer something real in return, not promises, not intensity, not potential. And here is the quiet truth. When you stop waiting internally, you stop abandoning the present for a fantasy future. You live here. You feel now. You decide based on what is revealed, not what is imagined. Jung believed that life moves forward when consciousness catches up with truth. And your consciousness has caught up. You are no longer suspended. You are no longer half present. You are here, whole, awake, and ready. And this readiness is not longing. It is availability without need. It is openness without fear. It is love that no longer waits, because it already belongs to itself. Now, as you arrive here, something settles gently but firmly inside you. A recognition. Love did not change because someone else changed. Love changed because you did. Because you stopped waiting internally for life to begin, for clarity to be granted, for safety to arrive from the outside. This is the quiet ending of an old cycle. The cycle of leaning forward emotionally, of hoping that patience would transform uncertainty into devotion, of mistaking endurance for depth. You see now that waiting internally kept you suspended between who you were and who you were becoming. Jung said that the greatest burden a woman can carry is an unlived life. And inner waiting is exactly that. Life postponed, breath held, desire delayed. But now, the breath is full again. You are no longer living on standby. Love, from this place, is no longer a question you ask the future. It is a state you live from the present. You choose what aligns. You release what is not. You allow closeness without surrendering yourself. You walk away without collapsing. And this balance is not learned overnight. It is earned through awareness. You understand now that anxiety was never proof of love. It was proof of self-abandonment. And hope, when tied to fear, was not faith. It was avoidance of choice. Releasing both has returned something essential to you, authority over your own emotional life. And this authority does not harden you. It softens you in the right way. You become more honest, more present, more real. Love, when it comes, meets a woman who is already whole. And if it does not come, life does not shrink around that absence. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing how you live, how you love, how you stay. This is not the end of longing. It is the end of dependence on longing. And as you move forward from here, remember this. Love does not require inner suspension. It requires presence. It does not ask you to wait. It asks you to meet. From this place, everything changes. And for the first time, you are not hoping it will. You know it already has.